There are moments when promises no longer feel comforting, not because they were false, but because you've lived long enough to know that life doesn't unfold on command. You've heard enough assurances, enough declarations meant to lift you, enough voices telling you that everything will work out if you just hold on a little tighter. And sometimes holding tighter is the last thing you have the energy to do. Over the years, I've noticed how quietly disappointment can settle into a person, not as bitterness, not even as despair, more like a gentle skepticism toward words that sound certain when life has felt anything but. You learn to listen differently. You learn to notice tone more than content. You learn to trust what feels steady rather than what sounds impressive. There's a particular tiredness that comes from being told to be strong when you already are, from being reminded to believe when belief has never really left you. It has only grown quieter, more careful, less willing to perform itself for reassurance. That tiredness doesn't mean you've lost faith in anything. It often means you've outgrown a version of faith that needed to shout. I've seen this in women who have carried responsibility for a long time. They don't doubt because they are weak. They doubt because they are honest. They've seen how easily certainty can promise what reality must negotiate slowly. And so they learn to rest in something subtler, not in declarations, not in guarantees, but in the sense of being held even when outcomes remain unclear. There is comfort in that kind of holding, not the kind that tells you what will happen next, but the kind that stays when nothing can be predicted. It doesn't insist on hope as a performance. It allows hope to breathe quietly without pressure. I wonder if you've felt that shift, the difference between being told you are not alone and simply knowing without explanation that you are not abandoned. Those are not the same experience. Being told something often asks for agreement. Being held asks for nothing. There were times in my life when I needed words to keep me moving, affirmations, reminders, promises that tomorrow would be different. And then there were seasons when words became less helpful, not because they were wrong, but because they could no longer reach the place where weariness lived. That place didn't need motivation. It needed gentleness. Gentleness is rarely offered in moments of struggle. We're more often encouraged to rise, to push, to overcome. But gentleness has its own strength. It recognizes when effort has already been given. When resilience has already been proven, you don't need to prove anything anymore. Not your endurance, not your faith, not your worthiness of care. If there is something steady beneath all of this, it doesn't ask you to perform belief. It doesn't measure your devotion by how loudly you declare it. It doesn't retreat when you grow quiet. It remains. I've learned to trust what remains, because what remains has already decided not to leave. There's a kind of promise in that, though it doesn't sound like the promises we're used to hearing. It doesn't predict a future. It doesn't outline a plan. It simply offers presence without conditions. And presence, when it's real, doesn't announce itself. You feel it in the absence of pressure, in the way your body loosens slightly when you stop bracing for the next demand. You may notice that loosening now, or maybe you won't. Either way is fine. Nothing here requires a response. There's no expectation to feel hopeful or grateful or reassured. Those feelings come and go on their own timetable. What matters more is the space being made for them to arrive naturally without being summoned. I've come to see that some of the most honest moments of trust happen when you stop asking life to promise you anything, when you allow yourself to be carried through uncertainty without insisting on guarantees. That doesn't mean giving up. It means letting go of bargaining. And bargaining can be exhausting. You've lived long enough to know that life doesn't always explain itself in advance. Meaning often appears in retrospect, shaped by time rather than declarations. There is something deeply calming about accepting that you don't have to know how things will resolve in order to remain grounded. Groundedness isn't certainty, it's stability. It's knowing that even if circumstances shift, you won't disappear. You will adjust. You will respond. You will remain yourself through whatever unfolds. That knowledge doesn't come from promises made to you. It comes from promises you've already kept to yourself by staying present through what you've lived, and that matters more than any guarantee offered from outside. If there is a blessing here, it doesn't arrive as a reward for belief. It arrives as rest, as the quiet permission to stop striving for reassurance and simply be where you are. That kind of rest doesn't need explanation. It doesn't need validation. It just needs space. And space, when it's given freely, has a way of restoring something you didn't realize had been carrying so much weight. There is a moment many women reach when reassurance begins to feel different than it once did. Earlier in life, reassurance sounded like direction, like certainty, like being told exactly what would happen if you stayed faithful, patient, hopeful. And for a while, that kind of reassurance helped. It gave shape to the unknown, but with time, something shifts. Reassurance stops being about prediction and becomes about steadiness, about knowing you can remain intact even when the path doesn't clarify itself, about trusting that you are not being tested by every unanswered question. I've watched this happen quietly. Women don't announce it. They don't say, "I believe differently now." They simply stop needing every uncertainty to be resolved in order to feel safe. Safety begins to come from within. Not a defensive safety, a settled one. You may have noticed this in yourself, how certain words no longer land the way they once did, how promises that sound too perfect now feel distant, while simple presence feels deeply reassuring. That's not a loss of faith, that's refinement. Refinement removes what is no longer necessary. It keeps what endures. What endures is rarely loud. It shows up in how you keep going without demanding explanations, in how you allow disappointment to exist without letting it define you, in how you remain open even after being let down. That openness isn't naive, it's seasoned. You don't expect life to be easy anymore, but you also don't expect it to be cruel. You understand that complexity is part of the human arrangement, and so you learn to walk with it. I've come to believe that this is where trust becomes most honest, not when everything makes sense, but when you allow yourself to rest in not knowing without collapsing into fear. Fear used to speak loudly when things felt uncertain. It demanded answers. It insisted on clarity. Over time, fear loses some of its authority, not because uncertainty disappears, but because you've learned you can live with it. That learning doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments when nothing resolves, and yet you remain steady anyway. Have you noticed how much strength there is in that? Strength that doesn't announce itself. Strength that doesn't need to be activated. Strength that simply exists as part of you now. You didn't acquire it by trying to be strong. You acquired it by staying present through what you couldn't control. There's a kind of promise in that presence, though it doesn't sound like the promises we're used to hearing. It doesn't say everything will be fine. It says you will remain yourself even if things aren't. That's a different kind of reassurance, one that doesn't depend on outcomes. I've noticed that when women begin to trust this kind of reassurance, they stop negotiating with life. They stop asking, if I do this, will everything work out? They stop measuring their worth by results they can't fully influence. They become less transactional with hope. Hope no longer feels like something you have to maintain. It becomes something that comes and goes naturally without being forced. There's peace in allowing that. Peace doesn't mean the absence of longing. You can still want things deeply: connection, clarity, ease, without believing that their absence means something is wrong with you. You begin to see longing as part of being alive, not as evidence of lack. That understanding changes how you carry disappointment. It doesn't harden you, it softens you in a way that makes room for reality. I've learned that softness like that is not weakness, It's adaptability. It allows you to respond to life as it is, rather than as you hoped it would be. And adaptability is one of the most reliable forms of strength. You may notice that your relationship with trust has become quieter. You no longer need to declare it. You no longer need to defend it. It doesn't require constant reassurance. It's simply there, like a steady undercurrent beneath everything else. That undercurrent doesn't tell you what to do next. It doesn't push you forward. It supports you wherever you are. If there is something larger holding all of this, it doesn't speak in commands. It doesn't require you to believe harder or try more. It feels more like accompaniment than authority, like being allowed to walk at your own pace. That pace may be slower than it once was, or it may simply be more deliberate. Either way, it feels more honest. You're no longer racing toward a version of yourself you think you're supposed to become. You're living from the person you already are. That's a subtle but profound shift. It allows you to notice small moments of ease without dismissing them. It allows you to accept comfort without suspicion. It allows you to rest without guilt. Rest isn't something you earn here. It's something you allow. And allowing doesn't require permission. You've lived enough to recognize when something feels true without needing to prove it. You've learned to trust your own sense of resonance. That trust doesn't eliminate questions. It changes how they live inside you. They become companions rather than demands. They can wait, and waiting no longer feels like delay. It feels like alignment. There is another layer to all of this that often goes unspoken, even among women who are thoughtful and self-aware. It has to do with promises, tenable, not the ones we make, but the ones we were once offered. Over the years, many women were given assurances meant to steady them, promises that if they stayed faithful, patient, kind, everything would eventually make sense. Promises that life would reward endurance with clarity and effort with certainty. Those promises weren't malicious. They were often offered with care. But life has a way of reshaping how those words land. With time, you begin to notice which promises held and which quietly dissolved, not because you failed them, but because reality asked more complex questions than those promises could answer. That recognition can feel tender. It's not cynicism, it's discernment. You don't reject the idea of hope. You simply stop outsourcing your sense of safety to assurances that depend on outcomes. You begin to understand that steadiness cannot be borrowed. It has to be lived into. I've watched women arrive at this understanding slowly, often without naming it. They stop repeating words that no longer resonate. They stop seeking reassurance that feels thin. They grow quieter around declarations that once stirred them, not because they've lost faith in anything essential, but because they've learned the difference between comfort that soothes and comfort that steadies. Soothing comfort works for a moment. Steady comfort lasts. Steady comfort doesn't promise relief. It offers grounding. It doesn't predict what's coming next. It supports you where you are. That kind of support doesn't come from being told everything will be okay. It comes from realizing that you have already navigated things that were not okay, and you remained yourself through them. That realization changes your relationship with reassurance. You stop needing someone to tell you that you'll survive what hasn't happened yet. You know in your body that you will respond when the moment arrives. You've done it before. This is not bravado. It's memory. The memory of having lived through uncertainty without being undone by it. The memory of having adapted without losing your center. The memory of having felt afraid and still chosen presence over panic. Those memories are quiet. They don't announce themselves, but they form a foundation that words can't easily shake. You may have noticed that certain phrases no longer move you the way they once did. Promises of blessing, of reward, of protection may now feel distant, not offensive, just insufficient. They don't meet you where you live anymore. What meets you now is something simpler. The knowledge that you are not fragile in the way you once believed, that disappointment, while painful, is not fatal, that unanswered questions are not proof of abandonment. This knowledge doesn't harden you, it softens you in a different way. It allows you to hold hope without clinging to it, to trust without demanding certainty, to rest without waiting for permission. You may still appreciate reassurance when it's offered gently, but you no longer depend on it. You don't need life to guarantee anything in order to stay open. That's a meaningful shift. It marks the difference between faith as expectation and faith as relationship. Not relationship with an outcome, but with the act of living itself. Living asks for responsiveness, not prediction. And responsiveness is something you've practiced over time, in the way you adjusted when things changed, in the way you recalibrated when plans fell apart, in the way you allowed grief, disappointment, or confusion to exist without letting them define you. Those practices weren't deliberate. You didn't train for them. You learned them by living, and now they live in you. There's a quiet dignity in realizing that you don't need to be assured of a favorable future to inhabit the present fully, that you don't need guarantees to feel grounded, that you can stand in uncertainty without needing to interpret it as a threat. That dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply informs how you move. You become less reactive to words that sound certain and more attentive to what feels consistent. You notice how your body responds to different kinds of language. You trust that response without analyzing it away. This is how discernment grows. Not as judgment, as resonance. Resonance tells you when something belongs and when it doesn't. It doesn't argue, it doesn't persuade, it simply registers. You may have noticed how certain messages now feel too loud, too insistent, too eager to convince, and how others, quieter, less definitive, feel unexpectedly supportive. That's not an accident. It reflects where you are. You've moved beyond needing to be told that everything has a reason. You understand that meaning doesn't always arrive as explanation. Sometimes it arrives as the capacity to live without one. That capacity is not resignation, it's maturity. It allows you to remain open without being naive, to trust without being rigid, to hope without bargaining. And bargaining, you may have noticed, is no longer something you have energy for. You no longer negotiate your peace with the future. You don't promise belief in exchange for certainty. You don't measure your worth by whether things resolve the way you imagined. You've stepped out of that transaction. What remains is simpler. You show up to your life as it is. You meet what's in front of you. You respond with the steadiness you've developed over time. And when reassurance comes now, it doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't need to predict or persuade. It only needs to be honest enough to let you rest. Rest not because everything is settled, but because you are. There's a calm that comes when waiting no longer feels like something you have to endure. It begins to feel like a natural part of living, another rhythm, not an interruption. You stop treating the pause as a problem to be solved and start recognizing it as a place you can stand. I've noticed that when women arrive here, their inner world grows quieter in a particular way. Not empty, not flat, just less crowded. Fewer voices arguing about what should happen next. Fewer judgments about what it means that something hasn't happened yet. You don't rush to fill the space. You let it be. That kind of allowing doesn't make life smaller, it makes it more inhabitable. You begin to sense how much of your strength has come from adapting rather than conquering, from listening rather than insisting, from staying present rather than demanding resolution. Those ways of being rarely get named. They don't look impressive from the outside, but they are the reason you can sit with uncertainty now without feeling undone by it. You have lived long enough to know that not everything meaningful announces itself. Some of the most important shifts happen quietly, beneath the surface, without witnesses. This is one of them. You don't need to mark it. You don't need to remember it. You don't need to do anything with it. It's already part of you. At this point, there is nothing left to promise, nothing left to predict, nothing left to urge. The space has been set, and it doesn't require further shaping. So, this is where I stop. Not to conclude, not to reassure, not to explain, simply to leave the quiet exactly as it is.